They thought I was just another homeowner. But when the judge asked who owned the land, I didn't say a word. I just handed over the original deed. You should have seen their faces when they realized they'd built their empire on my dirt. The silence in that courtroom was louder than any argument I'd ever heard. For a moment, no one even breathed. The HOA president's mouth hung open. Their lawyer blinked twice, lost for words. The judge looked down at the paper I'd just handed him. Old, creased, worn from years in a file that had never been touched since my father passed away. That was the deed, the original, uncontested, never transferred deed. The proof that all 96 houses sitting in Clearwater Meadows stood on land that legally belonged to me. I didn't feel triumphant in that instant. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about winning in court. It was about everything that led up to that moment. The lies, the arrogance, the humiliation. It started with a letter. 2 years earlier, I was just a man trying to hold on to what my father left me. 30 acres of land outside Clearwater Pines. It wasn't much, not compared to the shiny new suburbs sprouting up around it. But to me, it was memory. My father built fences with his own hands. My mother planted a small orchard behind the old barn. I grew up there. After Dad died, I kept the land out of respect. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. One morning, I got a letter in the mail. "Dear property owner," it began, "we're contacting you regarding the Clearwater Meadows development project. Please reach out about your adjacent parcel." I didn't think much of it at first. Probably just another company trying to buy land for expansion. But something about the wording felt off. Adjacent parcel. My property wasn't adjacent to anything new. So, I drove down to the temporary office they'd set up. That's when I met him. Greg Whitmore, HOA president. He was slick, polished, and practiced, the kind of man who could smile while stealing the ground from under your feet. "Mr. Hale," he said, shaking my hand, "we're excited about what we're building here. A modern community, parks, trails, everything a family could want. And your land happens to be in a key location." "In the way you mean," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'd love to work something out. Fair price, clean sale, mutual benefit." I told him I wasn't interested in selling, that my father built that land, and it wasn't for sale. His smile tightened. "That's disappointing. I hope you reconsider. Development brings opportunity." Then he handed me his card. "You never know when you'll change your mind." I didn't know it then, but Greg wasn't used to hearing no. For people like him, no wasn't the end. It was a challenge. A few months later, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery, bulldozers, cement trucks, pounding hammers echoing across the fields. I walked out to my fence line, or where it used to be. The old wooden posts were gone, torn out, flattened, and right past where the boundary once stood, construction crews were digging trenches. I waved one down, a young guy in a yellow vest. "Hey, you're on private land." He shrugged. "Talk to the boss. We're working under Clearwater Meadows development." That name hit me like a punch. Clearwater Meadows. I drove straight to the HOA site office, heart pounding. Greg was there, laughing with his assistant over coffee like nothing was wrong. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, slamming the letter they'd sent me months ago on his desk. "You're building on my property?" He didn't even flinch. "Mr. Hale, we've surveyed the area. Your parcel falls within our zoning extension. Check with the county. It's all approved." Zoning extension. I'd never heard of it. But his tone made it sound final, bureaucratic, hopeless. "You forged paperwork," I said. "Big words," he replied, smiling. I'd be careful throwing them around without proof. I left shaking with anger. But underneath that, something colder began to form. Something that felt a lot like purpose. I spent the next few weeks buried in county records. I went from office to office, zoning, land registry, tax department, and every time I hit a wall of confusion. My land was listed as pending review. When I asked for details, clerks gave me vague answers. Probably part of the new expansion. "You'll get an update soon. The HOA is already filed." Already filed. That was when it clicked. Greg wasn't waiting for approval, he'd moved without it. He was using speed and intimidation to make it look legitimate. And the more I resisted, the more he pushed. By summer, the construction had advanced halfway across my land. Streets paved, foundations poured. Families were already reserving lots. I tried talking to a lawyer, but most wouldn't touch it. Too complex, they said. Too expensive. I watched them build, day after day. I watched the homes rise on soil that had once been mine. And I made sure every document, every photo, every date-stamped video was saved in a folder no one knew existed. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A year passed. The HOA held a grand opening for Clearwater Meadows, banners, ribbon cutting, new residents smiling for photos. Greg stood in front of the crowd, shaking hands, giving speeches about community values and growth. I stood at the back, arms crossed, watching him from the tree line. When our eyes met, he froze for half a second, then smiled smug as ever. That smile told me everything. He thought I'd given up. That I was just another homeowner too scared to fight City Hall. But what he didn't know was that I'd been quietly preparing my own case. Months of research, land deeds, original surveys, historical maps, my father's notarized ownership papers. I'd even gone back to the bank that financed my father's land purchase 40 years ago. The manager, an old man named Dennis, helped me dig out the original loan and title transfer. When I showed him the development blueprints, his eyes widened. "Son," he said, "this whole neighborhood's built over your family's boundary lines." That was all I needed to hear. It took nearly a year to get the case heard. Greg's lawyers tried every delay tactic possible. Motions, postponements, technical objections. But eventually they ran out of tricks. And that's how I found myself sitting in that cold courtroom, staring across the aisle at the people who thought they'd buried me under paperwork. When the judge finally turned to me and said, "Mr. Hale, do you have proof of ownership?" I felt something shift inside. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the yellowed folder, and laid the deed on the table. That piece of paper carried my father's name, his signature, his sweat, and his faith that land meant something. Greg leaned forward, trying to read it. His lawyer's pen froze midair. The judge compared signatures, looked up, then said the words I'd waited 2 years to hear. "This document predates the Clearwater Meadows acquisition. The land legally belongs to Mr. Hale." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Residents whispered. Reporters scribbled. And Greg, he just sat there, pale, jaw tight, realizing what he'd done. He'd built 96 homes on property he didn't own. Every sale, every mortgage, every title, void. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. That day didn't end with cheers or applause. It ended with lawyers scrambling, families crying, news cameras flashing. The HOA tried to negotiate, offering settlements, hush money, anything to make it go away. But I didn't want money. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to understand what happens when you take something that doesn't belong to you, not just land, but legacy. So I let them finish their community, let them build their dream on my dirt. Then I took it all back, legally, quietly, perfectly. As I walked out of the courthouse, I looked at the blue sky over Clearwater Meadows. The houses gleamed in the sun, standing proud. But they weren't Greg's anymore. They were mine. And as poetic as it sounds, I didn't feel vengeance. I felt peace. Because my father once told me, "Son, land remembers who takes care of it. And one day, it'll take care of you too." He was right. But what I didn't realize that day in court was that peace doesn't last long when pride is still alive. The HOA wasn't done. Not even close. 2 weeks after the verdict, I started getting letters again. Only this time, they weren't offers. They were threats disguised as appeals. They claimed the ruling was under reconsideration, that ownership disputes might invalidate my win, that continued obstruction could result in civil penalties. They wanted to scare me, and maybe they would have, if I hadn't already seen what they were capable of. So instead of replying, I started preparing again. Because people like Greg, they don't stop when they lose. They double down. One afternoon, I drove back out to Clearwater Meadows. The whole neighborhood looked different now. New cars and driveways, kids playing, people planting flowers in soil that used to belong to my father. I wasn't angry at them. They were victims too. In their own way, tricked into buying homes built on a lie. As I walked down the main street, a few residents recognized me from the news. One woman crossed her arms. "You're the guy who took our homes." Her voice cracked on that word homes. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I didn't take anything, that I was just reclaiming what was stolen. But what good would it do? To her, I was the villain in her story. I just nodded and kept walking. Greg's house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, or what used to be his house. It was quiet. Curtains drawn, mail overflowing the box. A for sale sign leaned against the fence, crooked and dirty. For a moment, I wondered what it felt like for him to go from king of the community to the man who built his own downfall, brick by brick. But then I remembered the night. I found the bulldozers tearing down my orchard, and I stopped wondering. A few days later, my lawyer called. "They're filing an appeal," he said, trying to claim the deed's validity expired under a dormant title clause. Laughed. "There's no such clause." "I know," he said. "They're desperate, but we'll need to respond." It didn't surprise me. Greg had money, connections, something worse, a bruised ego. But I had something he didn't. I had time, and I had the truth. Weeks turned into months. The court hearings dragged on. The HOA tried to twist every line, every document, every inch of gray area. But the truth was simple. My father's land was never sold, never transferred, never abandoned. They couldn't erase that. And yet, even as I was winning again, I could feel the bitterness growing around me. News headlines painted me as the man who evicted 96 families. Online forums called me greedy. Reporters showed aerial shots of the neighborhood, painting me as some sort of villain reclaiming paradise. But none of them showed the nights I spent sitting in my father's old barn, reading the faded letters he'd written to the county clerk decades ago, reminding them that our land boundaries were sacred. None of them showed the ache of watching the world forget what legacy means. One evening, I drove out again, not to the neighborhood, but to the far edge of the land where my father had once stood and told me, "Son, this land's not just dirt. It's proof that we existed." The sunset spilled gold across the rooftops of Clearwater Meadows, and I realized something. I didn't want their houses. I didn't want to destroy their lives. I just wanted my name to mean something again, so I came up with a plan. Instead of forcing the families out, I offered them a deal. Keep living there, but this time under my terms. I'd lease the land back to them for a symbolic fee. A single $1 a year. At first they thought it was a trick. Then they realized I wasn't their enemy. I was giving them what Greg had promised: community, but built on honesty. Word spread fast. Some called me the landlord who forgave. Others said I'd gone soft, but I didn't care about what anyone called me. I just wanted peace. For a while it worked. The residents stopped protesting. The HOA dissolved. Clearwater Meadows became quiet again. But Greg, he couldn't stand it. He showed up one evening, uninvited. I was in the barn, fixing one of the old tractors, when I heard tires crunching on gravel. He stepped out, wearing the same expensive suit, but the confidence was gone. His tie was loose, his face pale. "Congratulations," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You won. You happy now?" I didn't look up. I didn't do it to win, Greg. I did it because it was right. He laughed, bitter. "Right? You've ruined my career, my reputation. You think anyone's going to hire me again after this? You think anyone cares about what's right?" I wiped my hands and turned to him. "You did that to yourself." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "You could have sold. You could have made millions. But no, you had to prove a point." "I didn't have to prove anything," I said quietly. "You did, and you failed." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, Two men standing on the same dirt, one who built, and one who took. Then he said something I'll never forget. You think this land will love you back? It won't. It'll rot under your feet. You'll die alone out here, and no one will care who owned what. He got in his car and drove away. The dust hung in the air long after he was gone, and maybe he was right. Maybe land doesn't love back, but legacy isn't about being loved. It's about being remembered. Over the next few years, Clearwater Meadows changed. The families who stayed took care of the place. They rebuilt the community from the inside out. Every spring, they'd invite me to the neighborhood picnic. Kids would run through the fields where the old fence line once stood, and I'd stand there, quietly watching life return to what was once a battlefield. One day, a young man approached me. He couldn't have been older than 20. "Mr. Hale," he said, "my parents bought our home here before everything happened. I just wanted to say, thank you for letting us stay." I nodded. "Just take care of it," I told him. "That's all I ask," he smiled. "We will." And in that moment I realized the fight was over. Not because I'd won in court, but because the land had finally found peace, still. Sometimes at night, I walk out past the orchard. To the very edge where my father once stood, the wind still smells the same soil, grass, memory. And I think about how close I came to losing it all because of one man's greed. But greed has a way of consuming itself a few months later. I read in the paper that Greg had filed for bankruptcy. His new development deal fell apart. Investors pulled out. His name was tainted, blacklisted across the state. I didn't smile when I read it. I just closed the paper and whispered, "Guess the land remembers after all." Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers, and if you listen closely enough, you can hear it breathing beneath your feet. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. And if you listen closely enough, you can hear it breathing beneath your feet. Months passed after Greg's downfall. And for the first time in years, life felt still. The land was quiet again. Clearwater Meadows finally belonged to peace, not paperwork. I spent my mornings walking through the orchard, pruning branches the way my father once did, and my nights fixing the barn roof piece by piece. It was a rhythm I'd forgotten, simple, honest, grounding, but even peace has a way of testing you. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was silence at first. Then a voice, hoarse, tired, but familiar. "Mr. Hale," the voice said. "It's Greg." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I almost hung up. But something in his tone stopped me. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was exhaustion. "I need your help," he said quietly. The last time I heard those words from him, they came wrapped in manipulation. But now, they sounded like something else, defeat. I didn't answer right away. I just listened. He told me he'd lost everything. His license, his job, even his family. The HOA scandal had spread like wildfire. Lawsuits, investigations, debts. He said he didn't have anywhere else to go. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him he got what he deserved, but I remembered what my father used to say. "Son, the measure of a man isn't how he fights those who wronged him, but how he treats them once they've fallen." So I told Greg to meet me the next day. He showed up in an old pickup that looked one bad mile away from breaking down. The man who once wore $1,000 suits now stood before me in torn jeans and a faded shirt. His face had aged years since I last saw him. "Didn't think you'd actually come?" he said, trying to smile. "I almost didn't," I replied. "Why are you here, Greg?" He took a deep breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know where else to go. You won, hella fair and square. But I can't start over without asking for something first." I crossed my arms. "And what's that?" He looked down at the dirt under his boots. "A job, anything. I need to work. I need to do something that means something again." For a long time, I didn't answer. The wind moved through the orchard behind us, rattling the old fence posts that had once divided us. Finally, I said, "You'll work for me? But not as an employee, as a man paying off what he broke?" He nodded slowly. "I'll take it." I didn't trust him at first. I kept an eye on every task, from the tools he borrowed to the hours he worked. He started small, clearing brush, repairing the outer fences, maintaining the land he once tried to steal. Weeks turned into months, and to my surprise, he didn't complain. Didn't cut corners, didn't even talk much. It was strange. It's watching the man who nearly destroyed my family's legacy hauling wood and patching soil one day. As the sun dipped low, I found him sitting by the barn, staring at the orchard. "Funny," he said softly. "I used to look at land like this and see dollar signs. Now I just see work." I didn't respond. I just sat beside him, the two of us staring at the trees. He continued, voice trembling a little. "You know, I used to tell myself I was building communities. Truth is, I was just building ego. You beat me, Hale, but I think you saved me too." It caught me off guard. I didn't say a word. But deep down, something in me shifted. Forgiveness wasn't a decision, it was a process. And in that moment, it began. Over the next few years, Greg rebuilt himself. He didn't have much, but he had purpose again. He helped me restore the old farmhouse, planted new trees where the orchard had been torn apart, and slowly, the land began to heal, not just physically, but spiritually. One morning, he showed up with a rolled blueprint in his hands. "It's nothing big," he said, "but I've been sketching." He laid it out on the workbench, a small park design. Simple trails, benches, a garden. At the center, he'd drawn a plaque that read, "For the land that remembers." I looked at him. "You want to build this?" He nodded. "For your father. For what this place stood for. Maybe it's time we both leave something behind that isn't built on greed." And so we did. Together, we spent the next few months turning the eastern field into a community park. The residents came to help, planting flowers, bringing food, painting signs. It was the first time the land felt alive in years. When it was done, we held a small ceremony. No cameras, no headlines, no speeches, just people, laughter, and the sound of wind moving through the trees. At the center of the park stood that plaque-weathered bronze on a wooden post. "For the land that remembers." Greg stood beside me, hands dirty, eyes wet. "You'd think he'd be proud?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I think he already is." From that day on, I saw Greg differently. Not as the man who tried to take everything from me, but as a man who finally understood what it means to build something real. Years later, when Greg passed away, the town asked where to bury him. Without hesitation, I offered a small patch under the orchard he helped replant. Because forgiveness, like land, is sacred. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most become part of the soil that grows our peace. I visit that spot often. Not to mourn, but to remember. Because in the end, Clearwater Meadows wasn't just a place where greed met justice. It was where legacy met redemption. And as long as the wind keeps whispering through those trees, I'll always hear the same thing my father once said: land remembers. ChatGPT said they thought it was over. That after the court ruling, after the HOA was dissolved and Greg was forced to step down, everything would just fade away. Headlines, rumors, shame. But for me, it didn't end there. Revenge doesn't just disappear when justice is served. It lingers. It echoes in quiet nights, when you walk past the land that nearly got stolen from under you and realize it's yours again, but it doesn't feel the same. After the judge slammed the gavel that day, I stood still while everyone else moved, attorneys shaking hands, porters whispering into their phones, families muttering in disbelief. 96 homes. 96 lives built on something that was never theirs to begin with. Some of them weren't even angry at me. They were angry at him, Greg, the man who promised them paradise and gave them a nightmare. When the courtroom emptied, I walked outside alone. The sunlight hit different that afternoon. It was sharp, almost blinding. A man approached me, one of the homeowners, mid-40s, wearing a tie that looked too tight. He hesitated, then said quietly, "I didn't know, Mr. Hale. I swear, I didn't know the land wasn't his." You weren't supposed to know. None of you were. He looked down at his shoes, shame burning in his face. What happens to us now? That question hung in the air like smoke. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Weeks passed. The HOA offices were shut down, their signs taken off the gates. The construction companies that built the homes stopped answering calls. The media had a field day with it. The Great Clearwater Deed disaster. Reporters wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted statements. I turned them all down. I didn't want to be the face of revenge. I just wanted my father's land back the way it was before greed touched it. But when I drove through the neighborhood, all I saw were walls, fences, identical rooftops stretching across what used to be open sky. The land was mine, but it was covered, smothered by someone else's vision. I parked near one of the empty lots where construction had been abandoned halfway. The skeletal frame of a house stood there, wooden beams exposed to the wind. I got out and ran my hand along the rough wood. "Dad," I whispered, "I got it back." Part of me wanted to tear it all down, to flatten every house, every reminder of what they did. But I couldn't. Not just because of the law, but because of something deeper. There were families now. Kids playing in those yards. People who didn't even know they were part of a scheme. Destroying everything wouldn't make me whole again. It would just make me another version of Greg, blind with control. So, I decided to rebuild differently. It started small. I hired a survey team to remap the land properly. I worked with the city council to clear titles for the innocent homeowners, those who bought their properties in good faith. I didn't want to ruin lives that had already been misled. The court had granted me ownership, but I could choose how to use that power. That was my quiet revenge. Not destruction, but control. Real control. I set conditions. Anyone who wanted to stay could lease the land under new fair terms. No more ridiculous HOA fees. No more fake citations about lawn color or mailbox paint. I wasn't running a dictatorship. I was restoring balance. Word spread fast. Some residents moved out immediately, afraid of what I might do. Others stayed, the ones who believed me when I said I wasn't there to hurt them. I rebuilt the fences. Not to keep people out, but to remind them where the lines were real, honest boundaries. Greg, on the other hand, wasn't done. I got a call one evening from my lawyer. "He's filing an appeal," she said. I laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. "On what grounds?" "He claims there was a clerical error in the deed chain," she replied. "He's saying your father's will didn't clearly pass the land title to you. That old snake had one more trick left." When we went back to court, the room felt smaller, colder. Greg looked different now, thinner, desperate. His suit didn't fit as neatly, and his eyes darted around the room like a man who knew the end was near. The judge reviewed the documents again, flipping through the same papers that had once silenced an entire courtroom. "Mr. Whitmore," he said calmly, "the title has been verified by both county and state records. You've already been found guilty of misrepresentation and fraudulent development. What exactly are you trying to prove here?" Greg leaned forward. "I was misled. The title wasn't valid. It's all a setup." That was when I stood up. Not angry. Not loud. Just firm. "Your Honor," I said, "for once I agree with him. It was a setup, but not by me." By him? I walked to the clerk's desk and handed over a new folder. Inside were records, bank transactions, wire transfers, signatures from dummy shell companies Greg used to reroute HOA funds into his own accounts. I'd spent the last few months quietly gathering them. While he was plotting his comeback, I was digging his grave legally. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, his expression darkening with each one. When he looked up, his voice was like thunder. "Mr. Whitmore, you have not only committed fraud against Mr. Hale, but against your own community. This court finds you in contempt and refers your case for criminal prosecution." Greg's mouth opened, but no words came. His attorney packed up his papers without a sound. As the bailiff let him out, he turned his head toward me. His face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. I met his eyes one last time and said, "That's the thing about building on someone else's land. Sooner or later, the ground shifts." After that day, I didn't see him again. Word spread that he lost everything: his home, his position, his reputation. The community began to change too. Without the HOA's toxic grip, neighbors started talking to each other instead of filing complaints. The place that was once ruled by fear started to feel human again. One evening, months later, I was standing near the edge of the property where my father's old fence used to be. A boy rode his bike up the hill, waving as he passed. "Thanks, Mr. Hale," he shouted. "For letting us stay?" I smiled. "You're welcome, kid." The sun was setting behind the rooftops, 100 shadows stretching over the land that used to be mine alone. Now, it belonged to stories, to families, to laughter echoing where silence once lived. For a long time, I thought revenge was about taking back what was stolen. But it's more than that. It's about how you take it back. Whether you burn everything down or rebuild stronger than before. That night, I sat on the porch of my restored farmhouse, the only piece of the land that hadn't been touched by construction. I poured a glass of whiskey, the same kind my dad used to sip after long days in the field. I raised it toward the stars. "This one's for you, Dad," I said softly. "They tried to bury us, but they forgot we were the roots." The wind carried through the grass, rustling the trees that lined the edge of the property. It felt like an answer. A quiet one, but real. In the distance, the lights of the new community flickered, warm, alive. Not stolen, not fake. Just people living honestly. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't always about revenge served cold. Sometimes it was about patience. About letting them build their empire, brick by brick, before you pull the ground out from under them with nothing but truth and time. They thought I was just another homeowner, but I was the foundation beneath their empire. And when it all came crashing down, I didn't raise my voice. I just handed over the deed and let the silence do the rest.